Welcome to What Your Pastor Really Thinks. Talking about theology, culture, society, all the fun stuff of what your pastor thinks on certain topics that may not have time on the pulpit to talk about. Tonight, it's even in the morning, guys, as we record this. I need some more coffee. That's what that says. But what we're going to talk about today, I'm curious, what are you guys giving up for Lent? Ryan McBride, Catalyst Church, Canyon City. It's Lent season.
Yeah, good to be back once again. I don't actually do the whole Lent thing. Not because I don't value it or think that there's value in that. I just didn't grow up in a house that really observed that, taught that, reflected on that. That was like never really a thing in my house growing up. Even growing up like in a little old country Baptist church out in the boonies, like it's just not something that we ever did. So I think there's value there. I think it's great. I think I do have seasons where I will fast from or step away from social media. I can't really fast from food. I'm diabetic, so I would die. But there are other things I can give up for a season. And there's been seasons I've done social media, but not necessarily like in the name of Lent per se. But
that's fair.
Not that there's anything wrong with it. I think it's good. I think that can be beneficial. But yeah.
So you're saying you don't have a leap of faith to give up food? That's right. So you're not a snake handling church. Got it.
No, that's right.
So Pastor Drew Tarwater, he's giving up podcasts for Lent, apparently. Oh,
yeah.
But he's out on assignment as far as you know. Pastor Matt Wolf, Arise Church, Denver. What are you giving up for Lent?
I am giving up Lent for Lent.
Yeah. Wait, wow. Is it self-fulfilling? Like, are you allowed to do like that? Feels like you're using the definition in the.
I like Ryan am not a Lent guy. I'm not part like the liturgical calendar, all that stuff for the year. I'm like not that big into it. Like Ryan, I'm like, if I'm going to give something up, I'm going to pick a time or season to do that. So I didn't give up anything. Our community group, though, we meet during the week, in groups in our church. And we did have like a Fat Tuesday celebration. Somebody brought a king cake. So, and I got baby Jesus, a little bite in there. So I think that means I have to bring the cake next year or something. But no, I don't really do much for Lent. But we are going through the Sermon on the Mount in a current sermon series. And we got to the section where Jesus says, when you fast. And I was like teaching our church, I was like, it doesn't say like if you fast, it's like when you fast.
Yeah. So
that should be an expected part of our faith that we should be fasting. And we actually did a whole church-wide fast there then that week. So we're doing it. We picked just one day to do a 24-hour fast. So that was really good. We did it. And I said, hey, there's Christians all over the world fasting this 40 days. So we can do one, and I think it was good because a lot of people have never fasted except when the doctor makes them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really good practice to do.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about St. Patrick's Day here coming up today, the background of that. But before we dig deep into that, what I want to go on the Lent question with you guys as pastors of churches. You guys have churches that have people from multiple backgrounds. And so when like Lent's traditionally a Catholic thought, like when you have people come into your church and go, but this is what we used to do.
Yeah.
Like this is how we did it growing up. Why don't we do it this way, Matt? Why don't we do it this way, Ryan? How do you guys approach those people to go, you're obviously welcoming them, but to balance the culture difference, which doesn't mean the culture where they came from bad. It's just not where it is today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's a good question. I think, for us, one of the benefits that we've had when it comes to this issue of, hey, I've always done it this way. Why don't we do it this way? Or we used to do this. Why don't we do that anymore? Type of thing. Cause I've been around that. But like for our church, we're 9 years old. And so, I feel like when you're a church plant, you really kind of get to create and build a culture and as long as you have clarity on vision and what you are about, nobody really, when you're a church plant, at least in my experience, nobody's really bringing with them a whole lot of we should do this, or we used to always do this, or why can't we do this? Everybody's just like kind of along for the ride, and as you're building and creating a new culture. So that's been my experience. But I've been around that where and even within church planting world, I know people come in sometimes with, hey, they'll come from a church down the street and, hey, we always did this, and so we should do that here or whatever. And they'll sometimes want to try to hijack even the vision or the mission of the church, the primary mission. And so that's where it takes like a flag bearer to say, no, this is the direction that God has called us, and the kind of church God has called us to be and what we're about. So, but yeah, that is challenging, because you want people to feel like, it's a place that they can connect with. And, a lot of times people come with a lot of nostalgia about how, great something was in their past, and want to apply it to the new church. So for us, it's just, we're always talking about vision, and we filter every decision we make directional through that filter of what has God called us to do in our particular location, culture, and context. So,
Matt, when people come to you from different backgrounds and cultures of churches and try to, work them all together into your church, or how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I just encourage people to have their own personal convictions. We're going to do things the way we do things. I actually was baptized into the Catholic Church as an infant. So like I'm a mutt too. Like my family did not stay in the Catholic Church. In fact, my mom, I thought we left when I was just a little kid. My mom's like, no, we left before you were born. I was like, then why'd you even baptize me? But it's like they're still holding on to that tradition. And I'm like, if that's your conviction, or if Lent was like really meaningful for you, like if it's so meaningful for you to suffer for Jesus by giving up Skittles, like go for it. Like I'm cool with that. Romans 14:5 is a verse I often go to. And it literally says one person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. So I'm just like, this is your conviction. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to give up something for Lent.
Sure.
We often, I think every year since I've been a pastor here in Denver, we've done a 21 days of prayer in January. So we start out the year with prayer, often with fasting too. And so we do something, we just do it in a different time of the year. Like, why did they pick that time of the year versus this one? I mean, it's just tradition. It's just culture. So have your conviction, do it, and also show grace to others who don't have that exact same conviction.
And you guys, Ryan, you said something. We're going to get to St. Patrick's Day, I promise. But you said something that I just had another question on, because I don't, it's fun for me not being the pastor to be able to ask pastor questions. And like we were talking even before we started recording, I like the behind the scenes of like organizational things.
Yeah.
So you're talking about like, being at a church startup. You've been there for 9 years. And Matt, I don't know your background with church startups, but when does a church startup, like kind of like a business, you go from the startup phase to now we're not a startup anymore. We're now like, how do you define that in a church world? Like a business world would be like, we're not raising money all the time, we're now cash flow positive and with our operations and our sales and things like that. We're now a real company.
Yeah.
Like with a church, where do you go from startup to now it's like, we're a big boy church. I don't know what the term is. Sorry.
Yeah.
We're a real church now.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And it was always funny, because we'd go to like, within Converge, which is like our network of churches, like-minded churches. There was always like, how long are they going to put you up at the different conferences to give a report on how the church plant is going? And at what point does that drop off? And I don't know. I don't think anybody's ever really clearly defined or declared where that magic number is. I think you're right, Rob, to a certain extent. On one level, maybe, those first few years, the first 3 or so years, you are getting a lot of outside support. A lot of church plants, they will go on the front end and get outside support from other churches, or sending organizations or ordaining bodies or whatever that looks like. And so maybe you could say, yeah, when you go from having a lot of outside support coming in to kind of more self-sustaining, that maybe that's a certain earmark anyway, in the life and the growth of your church. I don't know. I would say, I don't know that there's a magic number or a certain point where that happens. When you're not considered a church plant anymore, you're just an established church. I don't know what that is. For us, I feel like it happens when we started to be able to kind of hire some more staff, and weren't dependent on outside support. But again, like for us, we're still meeting in a church, or in a school gymnasium. We're still doing the portable church thing. And so there are some people who would even look at that and go, hey, we love what's happening here, but you're 9 years old and you're still meeting in a school. Like, is this too good to be true? Is it even going to be here next week? Like, is this long-term sustainable? And we would say yes to all of those questions, but there's this perception of permanence that some people have. So, yeah.
Matt, where would you say that
Yeah.
transition or the thought from like startup to established?
Well, I mean, I've only pastored established churches, so I don't know this as well. I do remember I went on a mission trip down to Bolivia, and we went to this church, and I forget what it was. It was like 60 people, and I was like, "Oh, this is a great church," and they're like, "No, this isn't a church plant. This is just a preaching site." So they had like strict definitions.
Oh.
It was like a preaching point until it reached 60 people for a sustained 6 months. And then it became a church plant. And then once I think it was like 120 people, then they became a church if they were at that size for 6 months. So like, I don't know, that was a cultural thing down in Bolivia.
Some of the data analysts got a hold of that organization.
Yeah.
Right. And then some people are like, once you're in a permanent facility, but then it's like, well, almost every retail store you ever go to is in a permanent facility. And we still think of it as like a legitimate shop. Like, who cares if you're leasing rather than owning a building?
Right. That's actually a really good point on that, on the behind the scenes.
I met a guy named Ryan Kwan at a Resonate church in Northern California. And his church was, I think it was like, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was like 2,300 people meeting in 3 service times before they ever got into a permanent facility 15 years in. But you have to do that in California because everything's so expensive.
Yeah.
It's just like not sustainable. He had, I think, like 3 semi trucks filled with equipment that they'd bring in every week, So I don't know if it really matters. I do know this. I'm not going to name the person, but there's someone near me. And like every time I like see him, he'd talk about his church plant, like that's his big thing. And I was like, at one point I was like, dude, your church is like older than ours. Because our church was a replant in 2007. And I came in 2017. I felt like it was an established church. So I would never call it a church plant or whatever. And he's like, I was like, it's a little older. He's like, oh no, we're still a church plant because we don't have a permanent facility. And then they moved into a permanent facility, changed the name. And I just saw him like post online, like 3-year anniversary of our church. I was like, 3 years, dude, you've been going for like 15 or 20. You just changed the name so you could get like a fresh start, like reset the clock. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, whatever.
Yep.
So there's no like rules. You make it up as you go, I guess.
Is that like when
and
you
who
have
cares
friends,
about this stuff anyways?
Yeah.
is that like when you have friends that like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, you mean you're unemployed? Is that
Yeah.
It's not entrepreneurs anymore, Rob. They're always like, I'm making an app. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, really.
By the way, if either of you guys need an app, I got you. Let me know. Rob at simpler.com.
Shameless plug there.
Absolutely. So
Yeah,
going
if
back
you actually
to,
want to make it happen.
it's funny when I work in like the digital world of marketing for businesses. I run into those people regularly. Like, this is what we want. I go, here's some similar companies that you want to mirror. They're like, yeah. I go, they spend about $1 million a month on marketing. They're like, we're not. I'm like, all right, well, that's what they spend. If you want to be like them, I'm not saying you got to be there tomorrow, but that's should be the target goal.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, like all of a sudden, like I feel like I'm a dream killer. I'm like the basketball parent or coach that tells the parent, like, no, your kid's 5'9". He's not getting a Division I scholarship.
Not making it on the team.
So, but all right, it's St. Patrick's Day. We've been working on this one. Ryan's been working on this with the information. I've done some Googling, and I'm curious, like St. Patrick, what's the big deal, Ryan?
Yeah. So he's a really intriguing historical figure to me. And he has really been for a couple of years now. And actually so much so that one of the things I wanted to do. So a year ago in April, I went to Ireland, took my wife, went to Ireland for kind of a vision trip. I met a guy there. His name is Gary Bolton. He's from Belfast area. And he is a church planter at heart, but he's leading now an organization called Ireland for Jesus. And they're just all about like church planting all over the Emerald Isle. So not just up north, but down in the southern regions as well. And in fact, I'm going back next month, taking my wife and going back to Ireland and seeing some of the progress. And we're doing a little bit of leadership training, and I get to preach there in a church. But when I was there, I was like, man, I want to see the St. Patrick stuff, right? The patron saint of Ireland. And I had done some study. I will tell you, there's a particular podcast that just like drew me in. And so I'll recommend this. You can listen to it wherever you get podcasts, but it's a short history of, and then you can look up their episode they did on St. Patrick. Phenomenal. And they just do those so well. So a lot of this information is from that. But also, we got to go to like the historical heritage center in Downpatrick, which is like the county of Patrick, which is where his first church plant was. It's where his burial site is. All this is in Northern Ireland. And so just the history, we got to go through the museum. They have his whole story, and it's just so intriguing to me. And I think what stands out to me about St. Patrick is like, we don't really understand, like we just celebrate. It's a day we wear green. Good job, Rob. It's a day we wear green, and we pinch each other if we're not wearing green, and we get green beer, and we celebrate a country that we're not very familiar with, right? And that's it. Have a green beer, and you're good. You've successfully celebrated St. Patrick's Day. But it's so much big. His story is incredible. If you are a follower of Jesus, and man, like the gospel has changed your life, then you will love so much and appreciate his story. So I'll just share a little bit about his story. So we're actually pretty lucky when it comes to the history of St. Patrick, because we actually have two documents that he actually wrote himself. The primary one is like the account of his life called his Confession, which is kind of like a letter that just details, his life and his work. But he was born, St. Patrick was born sometime like in the late 4th century AD. His father was actually a clergyman and like a city councilor. And so believe it or not, and a lot of people are shocked to hear this, St. Patrick was not Irish. He was actually born on the British mainland. And so he's not an Irish dude. He grew up in the church. He grew up under Christian instruction. And right around the time he was probably like 14 or 15 years old, he kind of detailed this in his works, but he actually kind of rejected his faith and considered himself at that point at a young age to be an atheist, even not believing, even though he grew up in the church, he grew up in the instruction, he knew about the Lord. His parents, I'm sure, talked about the Lord, as a clergyman. But not long after this, when he was about 16 years old, he was actually kidnapped. So this is where Ireland comes into the story. He was kidnapped in the middle of the night by slave traders from Ireland. These guys came over and they raided the British mainland, and his parents were away. And so they found him sleeping. They took him and some others, and they took him back across to Ireland and sold him in a slave market. And so now he goes from a life of really like comfort, and his family had status. And now he's a slave. And he was actually purchased by a farmer, and he was put in charge of tending to the sheep. And so that tending to the sheep also meant sleeping with the sheep. So in extreme cold and heat and the different elements, depending on the seasons, his master was a bully who beat him and abused him. He was like in the lowest position, all right, lower even than the livestock that he was tending to and caring for. And so he found himself just like depressed and lonely and hopeless. And here's where the cool part of the story starts to happen. The only thing that he really had to like lean into during that time was what he remembered about growing up in the church and the lessons he remembered about, that he was taught growing up in the church and under Christian instruction. And so even though like in recent years he had not really believed, he says something to this effect in his documents, but he remembered the Lord. And I love that. I think there's something powerful about remembering remembering the times God did something in our lives, the times God was faithful in our lives. Yeah,
I think that's just like a cool story because
beautiful.
there's a lot of like parents, grandparents
Yes.
in church, and some of you listening are like that when you're like, I taught my kid well, like I took him to church, we went to Sunday school, we memorized scripture or whatever. I thought we did everything right. My kid has walked away. It's like, but you never know when that seed might start to grow.
Yeah.
Like if you have planted the seeds, and God says in His Word in Isaiah 55, like, no word will return void. Like every seed gets planted, it's going to come to fruition if it's the good seed. So I just love that. I just wanted to throw that in. So somebody needed that encouragement right now.
Absolutely. And thanks for saying that, because I actually, I thought about that. I put like a little, because I have some notes here that I'm referencing, and I even put like a little asterisk here to say, and so if you're a parent watching this right now, like, get your kids to church. Make sure your kids are in church, and man, like you're right, Matt. You don't know at what point, like the Lord does the watering, right? Like, we can plant seeds and we can make sure our kids are there, but the Lord does the watering, and sometimes that doesn't happen right away, and you might be frustrated with where your kids are at or decisions they're making or whatever. But like with St. Patrick, he completely rejected the Lord, and he had done something actually in his teen years also, and then he never details it in his writings, but he had done something that he considered to be like a massive mark on his character, something very sinful that he kind of kept hidden away, and that led to probably some of that unbelief or whatever. But here he is, lonely, he's depressed, he's hopeless. He's living with sheep, right? And it says he talks about becoming a man of prayer, which I think is huge, right? He had nothing, no one around him, just the livestock, and so he became a man of prayer. And he talks about, like, not just in the morning, not just, okay, I'm going to start my day out on the right foot, or I'm going to say a prayer before this meal or whatever. Like he talks about. Like in his confession, he details praying almost constantly throughout the day, like nonstop. Like the Lord was with him, like by his side. I'm going to talk to my friend, like the whole day. He was just a constant, like, man of prayer. And one night, around the time he was 16, God came to him in a dream, basically, and was like, hey, I essentially see what you're doing. I'm going to provide a way out for you, but keep being faithful, keep doing your work. And so he did. He kept doing his work. And then again, a voice came to him in a dream in the middle of the night and gave him some great detail about a ship that was prepared and waiting to take him home. And so he devised a plan, waited until, of course, it was the middle of the night, and he ran away. And he traveled for weeks on foot, avoiding, of course, populated areas and whatnot. Eventually came to a coast town, got on a ship, and that was going back to Britain. And eventually he got home and was reunited with his family.
Wow.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, just that by itself is a miracle. To escape, to find a ship, to get home, be reunited with your family. That's just, it's incredible.
And like, so when you talk about that, even like in today's world, like, do you guys have, people like, hey, I had this dream, and like, how do you, like, Daniel interprets dreams, but like, is there like a new, it feels like sometimes there's a New Testament line, like that's Old Testament thought in dream, and that we're in New Testament thought. Is dream, I mean, I've heard stories in the about people in the Middle East. I think you guys have even said a few of them about conversions because of dreams.
Yep.
Is this something you guys hear of we'll say in the Colorado area much?
I've had quite a few people in our church. It's not really a way that God has spoken to me personally, but He's spoken to my wife that way with some dreams that have, like, bizarre, like miraculous dreams that have actually come true, including like the birth of our twins, which I'll have to share that story sometime, but definitely miraculous. And dreams are not just an Old Testament thing. In fact, in Acts 2:17, Peter is like preaching, like, so this is the first day of the church, this is Pentecost. And he said, he's quoting from Joel chapter 2. And it says, in the last days, I will pour out my spirit upon everyone. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams.
Yeah.
So dreams, visions are still part of the way that God speaks today.
Yeah.
What I always encourage people, because some people have vivid dream lives and they'll come up, hey, this happened. And I'm like, okay, cool. Write it down. One, because if it comes true, then you can always point back to it and you have it written down, not just like, I think that happened. And two, I would say, put it on the back burner. Unless it's super vivid, it's like, you got to do something right now. But a lot of times it's like, I'm not sure what this means, and I'm like, put it on the back burner, like leave it on a simmer. You're not going to take it off and forget about it, but leave it on a simmer because you don't know when the right time will be. And I think that that's been some helpful advice for me and for others as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I think also about, New Testament, I think also about, Paul, right? The Macedonian, right? Paul has it in his heart to go to Asia, right? And he has a dream, and it's a Macedonian who's begging him, asking him to come to the people in Macedonia. And so Paul has it in his heart to go to Asia, and then it actually says that the Holy Spirit would not permit him to go there. And he has this dream, and so he goes, okay, well, maybe I need to go to Macedonia. And so he ends up going. The first convert in Europe is this woman, Lydia. And it's this incredible, beautiful story of sometimes like when God doesn't make sense, when we have it in our heart to do something and God goes, nope. And God used a dream in that particular story to help communicate that with Paul.
No, it's crazy to think about that and how God works in all sorts of ways. So Saint Patrick gets back to Britain. What happens next?
He gets back to Britain. He goes, he goes back to, and I think he finds he's back in comfort now. And he's having a hard time readjusting to a life of comfort and ease. God continues actually now to speak to him through dreams. I think this was a primary mode, talking about dreams that God used to speak to him. Because he's now in his early 20s. He spends the next several years up until about his 40s studying the things of the Lord. I mean, he fully gave himself over to the Lord. And so now he's studying in a formal capacity within the context of the church. He's studying and living a faithful life. And one night, God revisits him again in a dream and calls him to go back to Ireland to preach the gospel. And this is the part I love. And I even get like emotional thinking about it, because I'm like, man, like, can you imagine, right, going back to a place and to a people who kidnapped you, enslaved you, treated you so poorly, so horribly, and going back to extend grace to them and just to preach the gospel. But it's because he knew the transforming power of the gospel. And so I don't know. He goes back. Maybe at first he's like, I don't want to do that, God, right? That happens a lot. But then God's like, no, you're going to do it. Whatever happens there, he goes back. He's obedient. He goes back, and historians will differ about the actual his actual impact, right? Because he's going and he's having to gain favor and permission by giving gifts to like a lot of the Druids. The Druids were like the pagan priests of Druidism, which, it's just a very, pagan culture there or whatever. And so he's getting their blessing to preach the gospel. He's bringing gifts to them, and he's having some success doing that. But, this is a day and age without technology. It's very slow moving, right? And so there's some debate. There are numbers like out there, like, tens and tens of thousands of people who receive the gospel through his teaching. Some say, that kind of like some other things is maybe a little bit of a stretch or more of a myth, that it was actually quite a bit slower moving, the gospel spread and whatnot. But either way, he was faithful to just preach the gospel. I actually got to go to the site of his very first church plant in 432 AD. It's in like Saul, Northern Ireland, like in the county of Downpatrick. Just unreal. to be in these places and to see some of this. I got to see the site, his burial site at a cathedral there. Man, just amazing. But he goes back, he preaches the gospel, and actually St. Patrick's Day is commemorating the date of his death, not his birth. And
is that common for saints? Like when the people celebrate them, do you know?
Yeah, I think that's probably more common. I don't know for sure, but I think it's probably more common to commemorate. Yeah, it's their life's work culminating in their moment of obtaining glory, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and so, but yeah, so he just continued to be faithful and preach the gospel, and it spread like crazy. And now, right, like the Irish, when this started, like they didn't even really acknowledge or celebrate St. Patrick's Day. It really was a thing for immigrants coming over in places like Chicago and New York, and to have something, to have a day where they were remembering, their country and their heritage and all that stuff. And so, I mean, today, because it's such a faddish thing now, like today they acknowledge that and commemorate that in Ireland, but it didn't start out in Ireland as a celebration for St. Patrick. So, but anyway, I'd encourage you do some more study, go listen to some podcasts. Just an incredible man of God who, by the way, like he was so full of grace, and he was so like gospel centric in everything that he did. And he loved the Lord, and he wanted others to know about it. So much so that he was obedient to go back to people who persecuted him. Yeah.
I didn't know much of that at all, Ryan, going into this. It's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. What like a great model for us. Like even people we dislike, hate, who have hurt us in the past, those are the people that often God calls us to, and we can have the biggest impact in their lives. I'm thinking of like, more recent examples, like a Nelson Mandela. He goes and preaches the gospel to the people who imprisoned him, in apartheid, or Corrie Ten Boom going to forgive the Nazis that killed her family and imprisoned her, in Germany.
Yeah.
And, so a lot of people, and I just want to like say this, like you have to be safe. You have to be like protected. I don't say go back to an abusive relationship or whatever, but a lot of people are like, who are the toxic people in my life? I'm cutting them out.
Yep.
And it's like, maybe they need Jesus.
Yeah.
We're supposed to love our enemies, pray for those who persecute us. And maybe you're supposed to cut them off, or maybe they're the people God is calling you to. And I think it takes some wisdom to do that, because St. Patrick can be a model for us, and not just a day to drink a lot of alcohol, turn the river green, pretend that leprechauns come into your house, whatever you do on St. Patrick's Day. Like let's remember the real roots. So I'm really glad, Ryan, that you brought this to our attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in my quick research last night, trying to learn a little bit more about it, did you hear anything where he used the 3-leaf clover to sort of explain the Trinity?
Yeah. So a couple of big, I don't want to use the word myths, but things that people talk about that they're more familiar with St. Patrick. Number one is like the whole thing with the snakes, and the other thing is using the clover, right? The significance of the clover, and maybe so. I mean, it would make sense that he used the clover to explain the Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, as the three parts of a standard clover. Of course, everybody's pursuit is that 4-leaf clover, but the standard is the 3. So yeah, that was a thing that a lot of people talk about. That part of the story is that he used that, and again, historians would debate. Oh, someone just made that up, and that's a myth. But it certainly ties in well, and is plausible that he could have done that. The other thing is the snakes, right? That he drove all the snakes out of Ireland. And actually, if you go to like their museum of like nature and science for Ireland, like there never actually has been snakes like in Ireland. So that wasn't a thing. That I think that's more of like symbolic of he drove out the snakes, or the evil, right? Snakes are synonymous with evil, and so that it was symbolic of him driving out like the paganism and the evil. And that he almost single-handedly by by way of preaching the gospel was able to drive that out of Ireland. That being said, I mean, Ireland is one of the least reached English speaking nations still, with all of their history, with all of their exposure to the gospel, and the work that Gary is doing. And he's a guy that we support again over there in Belfast. And so if you're interested in that, in connecting and learning more about Ireland for Jesus, let us know, reach out. You can message Rob or leave comments. Be happy to pass that along. But I mean, something like in Dublin, it was crazy. He said there's like one church for every, it was like one church for every, I want to say he said like 35 to 45,000 people. I mean, and of course the mainliner denominations are like, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's going out. And so, but there's this resurgence where, I mean, people are being just changed and impacted by the gospel, and Gary, of course, so many people in Ireland, but through this Ireland for Jesus initiative are just being changed. And we get to go back here in a few weeks and see how, even just in 1 year, how that's expanded and grown. And so really excited to do that. So I'll follow up with you guys after that trip and let you know how that's going. But yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So when I went to Wendy's the other day and they had the mint frosty that had nothing really to do with St. Patrick.
I mean, if it was green, so yeah, I don't know. Probably not much to do.
Okay. Like, does he get at least get like a royalty on that? I don't know how that works.
I mean, he should.
They should give it to Ireland for Jesus, man.
Give it to Ireland for Jesus.
Come on, Wendy's.
Right.
Step up,
Right.
Dave Roberts.
Right.
So, hey, as we wrap this up, any parting thoughts here? Matt Wolf, Rise Church Denver. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just remember what this means. It's not just a time for a party, drinking too much, putting fake green footprints, in your house. If you do that kind of thing, let's remember about the incredible story of someone who was enslaved going back to preach the good news to his enslavers.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Pastor Ryan McBride, Catalyst Church, Canyon City, parting thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say take some time today. If you're watching this today on St. Patrick's Day, take some time today just to reflect on the goodness of God. That's really what St. Patrick's whole life and work was about. That he's so relatable, because all of us have moments of like where we get to a point where we're like, man, like I know this intellectually, but maybe what I understand about the Lord never made like a connection to my heart, And I think that was his story. Like, he grew up in it. He understood some stuff about the church, but it took a situation in his life of really needing to depend on the Lord, where he just threw himself into that, became a man of prayer, and what resulted is just a beautiful, faithful life, and God using him in tremendous ways to make a huge impact on the history of the world. And so, maybe take some time to just reflect on his story and on the goodness and the faithfulness of God on this day, on St. Patrick's Day, rather than what we're known to celebrate this day with. So spend some time doing that today.
Absolutely, Ryan. Thank you for bringing this to our attention and sharing the story and your experiences with Ireland. I learned a lot, so that it's fun for me. At least you got a solid audience of one here, Ryan.
Right on. That's all I can hope for.
So guys, thank you so much. If you're listening, going, leave us comments, ask us questions. We'll have another Q&A episode here coming up soon, where we'll ask the pastors what your questions were more directly to them. So either put them in the comments or email them to me, just rob@simpler.com. That's SYMPLER.com. Or if you need an app, let me know too. I can help you out with that as well. But guys, thank you so much. Looking forward to Pastor Drew Tarwater. He's given up podcasts for Lent, so he's not here. So as far as you know, or he's actually out on assignment, or he's had other plans.
I heard he also gave up hair growth for Lent. That was one of his things. So
yeah.
I
like that, right?
That's a jab. He's gonna get me back on something.
I like that. We're gonna make sure that makes the final cut here. That's for sure.